Just 2 weeks ago, I was Skyping with my friend Sam over at Hope College. And we were talking about my new cat, and she's adorable, I know, right? And I got her from the animal shelter. And she was saying, oh, that's awesome. I wish I could get a cat of my own. And right, she lives in the dorm, so she can't have a cat, right? Because college dorms don't allow that. And so I said, well, yeah, I know you can't get a cat, but you could still get a fish, right? And her comment was, it's not the same. It's not the same. And I wanted to press the issue a little further and say, like, well, what do you mean it's not the same, right? A fish could be just as good of a pet as a cat. And she said, no, because you can't, like, pet a cat. You can't pet a fish, right? And you can't snuggle with a fish, right? They're just kind of there in a bowl. And I was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But can you give me something more? And she said, it's just not the same. And that seemed like an odd comment to me when we live in a culture that stresses mind over matter. We live in this culture that states that you can have just as good of a relationship with somebody in Japan over Skype as you can with the person that you eat lunch with every day. And we live in this culture that states that when you're in conflict with somebody, it's really important that to forgive them, you have to believe it in your mind. It's not good enough just to say, I forgive you, and give them a handshake and walk away, right? Your mind has to be authentic. And so it seemed odd for me that why can't you just think that the fish is just as good as the cat, right? What's so important about that physical expression in a cat? Why are fish better than cats, right? Is it really just the thought that counts? Or does physical expression actually add something new to the table in relationships? And I think it does. So today I want to talk about the importance of physicality in restoring relational bridges. And to give us an entry point into this idea of physicality, I want to talk about, first, the drama of embrace, thinking about embraces in general, just physical expressions of hugs or handshakes through a play form. And this is Miroslav Volf's work in his book, Exclusion and Embrace, and he's the one that puts it into 4 acts. And his first act is the opening of the arms. That's the first step, the first act in an embrace. And in this act, the person that's opening the arms is stating their discontentment about being alone. So they don't want to be alone anymore. They want someone to draw near unto them and show them that care and compassion. So they're at this state where I feel pain being all by myself, and I want to experience the joy of being near unto you. That's the first act. The second act we might forget, but it's the act of waiting. And I think this is extremely, extremely important. Because you don't know if the other person is going to accept your hug or your handshake. They could blow you off and be like, nah, I don't want to associate with you. And that could be really damaging. And so you have to wait, because there is no implication of reciprocation. You don't know if they will accept. And so you stand there waiting. And then we come to the good part of the drama, right? Where the arms close around each other, right? Or the fists, the hands grasp. And that's where the tenderness and care is being shown between the two individuals, where both sides are not overwhelming the other, but there's this mutual consensus of I care about you and you care about me. And then finally, we get to the fourth act, which is where the arms become reopened. There's not this meshing together of you and I into a we, right? The distinct identities are preserved, where it says, I want you to be near, but I don't want you to become me. We just need to be close and then separated. I want to know you're near. And so the thing I want to emphasize again is that embraces are risky. There's an underdetermination of the outcome. You don't know what's going to happen. And I think this is the key to what gives the power in physicality. I want to go to some examples now of the power of physicality, both in literature and in science. We're going to begin with literature. From one of my favorite books, The Great Gatsby. In The Great Gatsby, towards the end of the book, we're going to go all the way to the end. In chapter 9, Nick Carraway, the narrator, has just run into Tom Buchanan on the street. And Tom Buchanan is this really kind of disgusting character. You really hate him, especially for his involvement in the death of Gatsby. Spoiler alert. But he runs into Tom Buchanan, and he says, Tom, what the heck, man? What did you do? And he goes on for 2 pages ranting at Tom for his atrocities to Gatsby and how he has ruined not only Gatsby's life, but the lives of all the people associated. And then finally, Tom just says, okay, fine, let's shake hands and leave. So he offers up his hand. And Nick extends his hand out and it makes the comment, I shook his hand. It doesn't give the explanation why he put his hand out there, but he grasped the hand back. And then it makes this comment. It seemed silly not to, for I suddenly felt as though I were talking to a child. Suddenly. That's a very key word, because it makes the comment in the association that the handshake is changing the way that Nick looks at Tom, which is incredible. It was nothing to do with their talk, and it's nothing to do with what he has done in the past, but simply the handshake changes Nick's impression of Tom from being this despicable character into someone that was maybe just a little ignorant, a child. So that's the first example of the power of a simple handshake. Now I want to go to a more powerful example. It comes from A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. In this novel, it begins with prisoner 105 North Tower. And he has been otherwise known as Dr. Manette. And he has been locked up in the Bastille for 18 years. And as a result of this isolation in the Bastille, he's developed this psychological trauma and this obsession with cobbling shoes. And that's all he can do. And he's unable to communicate. And he's lost his ability of language. So he just cobbles shoes. And then it has been announced that he's actually going to be released from prison after 18 years. And this is such good news. And his daughter finds out, and his daughter rushes over to come to the prison to see him finally come out of prison. And so she walks into the jail cell, and he doesn't recognize her. The sight doesn't do anything to change his personality, to change his outlook on life. And so she calls to him and says, Dr. Manette, Dad, and nothing changes. And so finally she comes near unto him and sits down and puts her hand on his arm is the comment. And at that point, he looks up at her. Something changed. He's brought out of his stupor. And then he sees her golden hair and he recognizes it and he thinks, oh my goodness, I've seen that hair before. That is the hair of my wife, but she is dead. So who could this be? And then he reciprocates. As she is touching his arm, he takes his hand and grabs the hair. And then he comes to the recognition, this is my daughter. And I love the words that Charles Dickens uses to describe this moment. It says, he went from a faintness due to solitude and disuse, not a physical weakness, so he's not a weak man, but he is faint because of his isolation. And he is recalled to life through a simple touch and through him reciprocating. He goes from isolation and disuse to being recalled to life. The power of physicality. Now, not only in literature does it show this power of physicality, but science currently is starting to make these same associations that literature has been making. In a fairly recent experiment in the 1950s, Harry Harlow conducted a series of experiments with monkeys, with baby monkeys, and ripping them from their mothers and seeing what happens to them when they are maternally deprived. And he set up these isolations for 3, 6, 12 months, and all of the monkeys that were separated from their mothers experienced terrible psychological trauma. It was very bad. And so he wanted to see, well, what's the thing about mothers that's actually encouraging this positive psychological growth? And so he developed these surrogate mothers. The surrogate mother on your left is a wire mother, and his idea was this is going to be the nourishment mother, the one that supplies the food to the baby monkeys. And then on your right, there is the cloth mother. And the cloth mother is only going to be a piece of cloth. And he wanted to see if there was something between these two, whether it was the physicality or if the nourishment was going to draw these baby monkeys to them. And overwhelmingly, all of the baby monkeys favored the cloth mother. And he thought, why is that? The other surrogate mother is giving all the food, but it's the cloth mother that they were drawn to. And then he wanted to see, well, how powerful are these cloth mothers? And so he threw these different monkeys into situations, into new environments where they didn't know what was going on, and he made them intentionally frightful. And the baby monkeys that had only been raised on the wire mothers were so stunned that all they could do was go into the corner and suck their thumb because the new environment was too much for them. But the baby monkeys that had been raised on cloth mothers acted completely normal and were exploratory and curious and wanted to see these new adventures that were about to unfold for them, even though it was kind of a little frightening. And Harlow was blown away, and he thought, well, maybe there's some way that I can get these baby monkeys to actually prefer the wire mothers and instead of these cloth mothers. And so he set up this rig where it would blow bursts of air at the monkeys when they tried to cling to the cloth mothers to get them away. But all it ended up doing was actually bringing them closer, and they clung tighter to the cloth mothers. And so what he concluded is that physicality breeds love and attachment. And when you actually try to tear that apart, paradoxically, it actually just becomes stronger. In a more recent social experiment by director Tatia Pili, this viral video, The First Kiss, she directed, where she got 20 strangers to come together, and she paired them up into groups of 2 and said, hey, can you guys kiss on camera for me? That's it. I know you've never met them, but just kiss them. And so she paired them off, and then they kissed. And then she conducted a couple of interviews afterwards with all the participants, and she asked, what'd you think? How did you feel towards the other person? And all 20 participants made the comment that I felt that much more intimate and close with the person that I had kissed only for 2 minutes than a lot of my friends, which is incredible, right? They only kissed this person for like 2 minutes, but they felt that much more intimate and close through simple physical expression of kissing. And so then she was asked, well, why do you think this is the case? And Tatia Pili made the comment, I think it's because of the human vulnerability that's being shown. Going back to that drama of embrace, right? The second act, waiting, under determination of outcome. You don't know what's going to happen. And for these strangers, they clearly didn't know what was going to happen. And that unpredictability breeded the love and attachment in the same way that it did for the baby monkeys. So what though, right? Physicality has some power, and it has to do with this unpredictability, right? So what? How can I apply it to my life? Well, psychologist Leon Festinger came up with this theory called cognitive dissonance. And what cognitive dissonance states is that your actions and your thoughts always tend to be consistent. And often they can become inconsistent, and then what you're going to do in your mind is say, well, if they're inconsistent, I have to change one of them, right? So if my thoughts and my actions aren't consistent, I need to either change my actions or change my thoughts. And we do this all the time, right? Every single New Year's Eve, right? We have our list of resolutions, and we say, I'm going to change the way I think, right? Eating right is important to me, or exercising every day is important. And so we change our thoughts, and we say, that's going to change our actions, right? But what ends up happening, right? You just fall back into your old habits. The thoughts don't actually have the power over your actions. And so what I'm proposing is, how about we just start changing our actions and see the way that it actually starts changing the way we think? Going back to the example of someone that wrongs you and you have to forgive them, right? I know you don't really want to forgive them, right? They've just stabbed you in the back. But maybe just shaking hands with them is going to do something. In the same way that it brought Nick Carraway from a point of disgust to care for Tom Buchanan, it can do the same thing for you. And maybe if you don't really care for somebody, you don't really love them, right? You're like, oh, gosh, I don't want to deal with this person. They're kind of annoying. I don't really love them very much. you can actually start loving them by I don't know, buying them flowers or a box of chocolates, right? Something that shows that you actually care about them. And when you do that, you're creating cognitive dissonance because your actions aren't in line with your thoughts. I'm doing nice things for them, but I'm treating them like crap. That doesn't make sense. I guess I should think about them better if I'm doing nice things for them, right? And you'll start changing the way you think based upon your actions. So this is another tool that I'm giving you to change who you are. And this is not an exhaustive list, right? This is not an exhaustive list. I want to encourage you guys, think of the different ways that you can start applying physicality into your relationships to actually change them for the better. And so with that, I think that's why fishes and cats really aren't the same. Thank you very much.